The chandelier above the ballroom didn't flicker, not once. 1,000 crystals hung in perfect obedience, throwing light like cut ice across black tuxedos and satin gowns. The kind of light that makes everyone look richer than they are and emptier than they want to admit. At the far end of the room, beneath a wall-sized portrait of Charles Waverley, the founder, the legend, the dead man who still owned the air, 2 security guards stood shoulder to shoulder. Between them, a man in a midnight suit tried to keep his smile. Tried. His jaw tightened with every step as they guided him through the aisle of turned heads and stopped breaths. He didn't struggle. He couldn't. Not without admitting what he had already lost. Damien Waverley, the CEO who had arrived late like a king, the husband who had walked in with a pregnant mistress on his arm, the son who had believed his name was a weapon. Now he looked smaller. Not because the suit didn't fit, but because the room no longer made space for him. Someone's champagne flute hit the marble with a soft, humiliating chime. A ring tapped once against glass. Ting! Sharp as a pin. Evelyn Hart Waverley stood near the center table, her hands steady, her posture immaculate, her expression so calm it made the air feel heavier. Damien's eyes found her as if pulled by a hook. He expected tears. He expected rage. He expected the kind of public spectacle he could later twist into a story. Instead, she gave him a look that wasn't cruel. It was something worse. It was certainty. And when he passed close enough, still surrounded by the security guards, Evelyn leaned in, just slightly, so only he could hear. Her voice was quiet, almost kind. "Do you hear that, Damien?" she whispered. He swallowed. The ballroom was silent except for the faint hiss of rain against the tall Mayfair windows. Evelyn's ring touched the rim of her glass again. Ting! A small sound that seemed to slice the moment into 2. "The sound of you leaving," she said, "without a throne." Damien's face tightened. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Evelyn watched him, not like a wife watching her husband, but like a surgeon watching an anesthesia monitor. And then she said the line that made his eyes change. The line that told him this wasn't a reaction. It was a plan. "I've been waiting for this," Evelyn murmured. 15 years. Damien's breath hitched, as if the chandelier above had finally, at last, flickered. It didn't. The light remained steady. The empire remained cold. And as the security doors swallowed him whole, Evelyn lifted her glass to the room, slowly, elegantly, like a queen who never needed to raise her voice. The guests didn't know what to do with their hands. The board members didn't know where to look. The pregnant woman near Damien's empty chair clutched the fabric over her stomach, blinking too fast. And somewhere in the back, Margaret Waverley, Damien's mother, stood up. Not to defend her son, to stand beside her daughter-in-law. Because if you wanted to understand why a mother would watch her own child fall, if you wanted to understand why a wife would smile through betrayal like it was already solved, then you had to go back. Not to the beginning of the dinner, not to the beginning of the marriage, but to the moment the founder decided his empire wasn't safe in his son's hands. Because this story, it didn't start tonight. It started with a clause, a trust, and a woman nobody thought was dangerous. The rain began before sunset. London rain, the kind that isn't dramatic enough to be romantic. It just persists, like gossip, like resentment. From the top floor of Waverley Tower, Mayfair looked like a chessboard slick with water. Headlights moved below like tiny pieces being repositioned by invisible hands. Evelyn Hart Waverley stood in her dressing room, watching the city through glass that didn't fog. Behind her, her assistant, Mara, laid jewelry onto a velvet tray. Earrings like tiny moons, a necklace that belonged to the family vault, and the wedding ring Evelyn never removed. "Mistress Hart Waverley," Mara began, then corrected herself. "Mrs. Waverley, the driver is downstairs." Evelyn nodded, still watching the rain. "Is Mr. Waverley already at the tower?" Mara asked carefully. The question was small, but it contained years of tension. Years of Damien arriving late, Damien apologizing in public and dismissing in private. Damien treating punctuality like a rule for other people. Evelyn didn't turn. "No," she said. Mara hesitated, then said what assistants learned to say without saying too much. "Would you like me to confirm his arrival time?" Evelyn finally looked at the tray of jewelry. The pearls were the kind that made people assume you had never suffered. The necklace was the kind that made people assume you had never worked. Evelyn picked up the earrings. Her hands didn't tremble. "No," she said. "Let him arrive when he likes." Mara's eyes flicked to Evelyn's reflection in the mirror. Evelyn's face was serene, as if she were preparing for a concert, not an event where investors would analyze every blink. As if she didn't know deep in her bones that something was coming. The Founders' Dinner wasn't just a celebration, it was a ritual. Every year, Waverley Dominion Group threw the Waverley Founders' Dinner to remind London's elite of three things. The empire was still strong. The family was still in control. The future would be decided in rooms like this, behind doors like those, beneath chandeliers like that. The guest list read like a map of power. Ministers disguised as philanthropists, bankers disguised as art lovers, board members with smiles polished to a dangerous shine. Tonight's dinner would be in the Waverley Tower Ballroom, a room designed to swallow noise and keep secrets. Evelyn walked into that ballroom as she always did, not as the CEO, not as a board member, as the wife. The role people underestimate because it feels decorative. She greeted people with measured warmth. She remembered names, children, charities, new yachts, old scandals. She did what she'd been trained to do, smile, be gracious, be forgettable. And the cruelest part was that she was brilliant at it. Damien's chair at the head table remained empty. A few guests noticed. Some smiled like it was charming. Others looked annoyed but said nothing. Margaret Waverley arrived on time. She moved like a woman who had never had to ask permission. Her hair was silver and perfectly cut. Her lipstick never smudged. Her eyes, blue, sharp, swept the room like security cameras. She kissed Evelyn's cheek. "You look composed," Margaret said softly. Evelyn smiled. "It's a dinner." Margaret's gaze stayed on her a fraction longer than polite. "It's never just a dinner," Margaret replied. Evelyn's ring tapped against her glass as she reached for her water. Ting! The sound was small, but it landed. A board member approached, Graham Holt, the CFO, a man who spoke in percentages and wore kindness like a tie. "Evelyn," he said. "Any word from Damien?" Evelyn tilted her head. "Not yet." Graham's smile tightened. "He'll come. He always does." That was the problem. He always did. Just late enough to make everyone wait. Just late enough to remind the room who the center was. Evelyn watched servers place menus with surgical precision. She watched staff check microphones. She watched photographers take test shots of the founder's portrait, like Charles Waverley was still alive and might approve. And inside her, a quiet thought repeated like a prayer. Let it happen. Because Evelyn had spent 15 years building herself into a woman who could survive anything. Not by screaming, by preparing. 15 years ago, Evelyn was not yet Evelyn Hart Waverley. She was Evelyn Hart, a scholarship student with a mind like a locked box, quiet on the outside, full of sharp edges inside. She met Damien at a charity gala at the Royal Albert Hall. He was charming in the way men are charming when they know charm is currency. He asked her questions like he wanted to know her. He laughed at her jokes like he wanted to be worthy of them. He introduced her to people like he was proud of her. And Evelyn, who had never been loved by someone with power, mistook performance for devotion. Damien's father, Charles Waverley, watched from across the room. Charles was already ill then, the kind of illness that makes a person thinner and sharper. His eyes missed nothing. When Damien brought Evelyn to Waverley House for the first time, Charles greeted her with a handshake that lasted longer than necessary. Not creepy, measuring. "Evelyn Hart," Charles said. "What do you want?" Evelyn blinked, startled by the directness. "Excuse me?" Charles smiled faintly. "Most people who walk into this house want something. Money, status, safety, revenge, love, control. Evelyn's throat tightened. I want to build something. I want a life where I don't feel like I'm one accident away from losing everything. Charles nodded as if that answer mattered. He didn't ask about her family. He didn't ask where she was from. He asked about her mind, her books, her opinions on corporate governance. It was the first time anyone in Damien's orbit had looked at her like she might be useful for more than a photograph. Later, Charles invited Evelyn into his private library. The room smelled like bergamot tea and old leather. Rain tapped the window, and Charles, without preamble, opened a folder and slid it across the desk. "This is the Charles Waverly Family Trust," he said. Evelyn looked down at the paperwork. The language was dense, legal, and precise. "I'm not family," she said carefully. Charles's gaze did not move. Not yet. Evelyn's fingers touched the edge of the paper. She didn't understand everything, but she recognized two things instantly. Charles was planning for his death. Charles was planning around his son. "Damien doesn't know about this," Evelyn said. "No," Charles replied. "Why show me?" Charles leaned back, his face half lit by the desk lamp. "Because I know my son," he said softly. "And I suspect you're the kind of woman who will survive him." Evelyn's chest tightened. Charles continued as if speaking to himself. "Damien thinks loyalty is a tool. He thinks people stay because they have no better option. He is talented, but he is hollow in the places that matter." Evelyn swallowed. "He loves you." Charles's smile was thin. "He loves what I represent." Then Charles tapped one line in the document. Evelyn leaned closer. The clause was strange. It didn't say the voting shares would belong to Damien. It didn't say they would belong to the firstborn son. It said, "Control of 60% of the voting shares shall be held by the CEO's spouse as an office attached to the position and not by the CEO personally." Evelyn stared. "That," she began. Charles raised a hand. "It is not romantic. It is not sentimental. It is protection." "Protection for who?" Charles's eyes sharpened. "For the Empire, and for the children who will inherit a world Damien might burn for his own comfort." Evelyn's heart thudded. Charles added quietly, "And for you, if you choose to stay." Evelyn looked up, stunned. Charles's voice lowered like confession. "A man like my son will betray you. Not because you deserve it, because betrayal is easy for him. It makes him feel alive." Evelyn's mouth went dry. "If that happens," Charles said, "you will need to be ready. Not emotionally, logistically." Evelyn wanted to deny it, wanted to say Damien would never. But something in Charles's eyes felt like prophecy, not opinion. That night, Evelyn went home and did something she never told Damien. She started learning the rules of his world, not by asking him, by studying what he thought she would never understand. Corporate structures, trusts, voting rights, board procedures. She learned to read financial statements the way other women learned to read faces. She kept her education quiet, because power, she understood, was safest when it looked like nothing. Years passed. Evelyn married Damien. She became Mrs. Waverly. She had 2 children, Amelia and Henry, beautiful, bright, innocent enough to believe their father's smile meant love. Damien became CEO, and Evelyn became what the world saw, a quiet wife, a graceful shadow, someone who hosted dinners and attended galas and smiled like a painting. Nobody saw the spreadsheets hidden behind recipe folders. Nobody saw the legal notes tucked inside children's storybooks. Nobody saw the private meetings with a solicitor named Julian Crow, arranged under the guise of estate planning. Nobody saw the way Margaret Waverly watched Evelyn, not with pity, but with curiosity. Because Margaret had been a wife too once, and she knew what men like Damien did when they thought the world belonged to them. The central wound wasn't just betrayal. It was being underestimated. It was being treated as furniture in the house you helped build. Evelyn lived with that wound quietly, and quietly it turned into a blade. It started with a scent, bergamot. Not from Charles's tea, from Damien's shirt. Evelyn noticed it one morning when he kissed her cheek and said he was leaving early for a supplier meeting. Bergamot was crisp, expensive, intimate. It didn't belong to him. Evelyn smiled and said, "Drive safely." Damien left. Evelyn went back to the kitchen where Henry's homework sat open on the table. She helped him with math. She packed lunches. She played her part so well, the world would have awarded her for it. But later that day, when the house was quiet and the rain returned like an old habit, Evelyn opened her laptop and did what she always did when something felt wrong. She checked patterns. Damien's calendar was locked, but the company's internal system wasn't as sealed as he believed. Invoices, travel bookings, expense reports, small discrepancies, nothing that screamed scandal, just enough to suggest someone was trying not to be noticed. Then came the first transfer. It appeared in the monthly corporate ledger like a shadow, a payment to an external consultant firm, Liongate Private Limited. The amount wasn't outrageous, high six figures, plenty of legitimate reasons, but the description was vague, and Damien didn't like vagueness unless it benefited him. Evelyn flagged it mentally. 2 weeks later, another payment, different shell, Marina Crest Holdings. Another month, another. Always Singapore, always consultant fees, strategic positioning, market entry exploration. Evelyn brought it to Graham Holt, the CFO, delicately. "Is Waverly Dominion expanding in Southeast Asia?" she asked over tea like a curious wife. Graham chuckled. "Nothing official." Evelyn's eyes stayed soft. "So these consultancy fees are part of unofficial planning?" Graham's smile faded slightly. "Where did you see that?" Evelyn tilted her cup. "I help with charity budgeting. Numbers travel." She offered him a version of truth that sounded harmless. Graham hesitated. Then he said, "Damien asked me not to raise it at the board level yet. He said it was personal strategy." Evelyn nodded as if she understood. Inside, something tightened, because personal strategy was just another way to say escape plan. At first, Evelyn thought Damien was preparing for divorce. She had enough emotional intelligence to sense distance. He stopped touching her hand at events. He stopped asking about her day. He started being polite in a way that felt like management. Then she saw Celine. Not directly, not yet. She saw her through Damien's reflection. It was at a private art opening, the kind where paintings were less important than who stood near them. Damien was across the room, speaking to investors. Behind him, a woman in a pale dress laughed at something he said. Her hand lingered on his forearm half a second too long. Her perfume, bergamot, carried on the air. Evelyn watched without moving. The woman was young, beautiful in the effortless way that comes from being told you're beautiful your whole life. She wasn't hiding, which meant Damien wasn't afraid. That was the real escalation, not the affair, the confidence. Evelyn didn't confront him. She didn't cry in a bathroom. She didn't call friends. She did what Charles had trained her to do without calling it training. She prepared. She met Julian Crow, her solicitor, in a quiet office near Temple. Julian was the kind of lawyer who spoke gently because he had seen how violence could look like paperwork. Evelyn placed a folder on his desk. "I need you to check these transactions," she said. Julian opened the folder. His eyes narrowed slightly. "These are corporate transfers," he murmured. "How did you obtain—" "I'm the CEO's spouse," Evelyn replied calmly. "And I'm careful." Julian looked up. "You think he's siphoning funds?" Evelyn's gaze was steady. "I think he's building a door. I want to know where it leads." Julian's voice dropped. "If you move against him, it will be ugly." Evelyn's lips curved, not in humor. "It's already ugly. I'm just choosing the lighting." Julian exhaled, almost impressed. "I'll need forensic accountants," he said. "Get them," Evelyn replied. "Quietly." In the weeks that followed, Evelyn lived 2 lives. In one, she was the perfect wife. She attended Amelia's school recital. She hosted charity meetings. She laughed at Damien's jokes in front of cameras. In the other, she became a shadow in the machinery. Forensic accountants traced transfers. Julian pulled the trust documents verifying the clause. Private investigators confirmed Celine Zhao's identity. A former finance analyst turned entrepreneur, linked to Damien's private travel. And then came the confirmation that made Evelyn's blood go cold. Celine was pregnant. 5 months. Damien didn't know Evelyn knew. He moved faster after that. The transfers increased, not just 6 figures, 7, 8. By the time the founders' dinner approached, the total moved out of Waverly Dominion's reach was nearly $55 million. Damien wasn't just cheating, he was bleeding the empire. And that, in the Waverly world, was unforgivable. Evelyn finally went to Margaret, not as daughter-in-law, as someone who understood what a founder built. They met in Margaret's private sitting room, a place that smelled like roses and old decisions. Margaret listened without interrupting, her face still. When Evelyn finished, the silence was sharp enough to cut. Margaret's hand tightened around her teacup. 55 million, she repeated softly as if tasting poison. Evelyn nodded. Over 8 months, Singapore shells, and a pregnancy. Margaret's eyes lifted. He intends to present it publicly. Evelyn didn't blink. Yes. Margaret's voice was almost a whisper. Charles always said he'd embarrass us one day. Evelyn's throat tightened. I'm not here to embarrass him. Margaret looked at her sharply. Evelyn continued, I'm here to stop him. Margaret's gaze held hers. Then slowly the older woman stood. Bring Julian Crow to my office tomorrow, Margaret said. Evelyn released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Margaret stepped closer, her voice low. I have defended my son his entire life, she said, but I will not defend theft from the family. Evelyn's eyes softened. Margaret, do not mistake this for sentiment, Margaret cut in. This is stewardship. Evelyn nodded. Stewardship. That was the word Charles would have used. By the time the founders' dinner arrived, the trap was set. Evelyn wore pearls, Damien wore arrogance, and Celine wore a pale dress designed to announce her body before she even opened her mouth. The room didn't know it yet, but the empire was about to change hands. Damien arrived 40 minutes late. The doors opened like theater. A gust of cold air slipped in with him, carrying rain and attention. Heads turned automatically. Phones lowered and then pretended they hadn't been raised. Damien stepped into the ballroom with the confidence of a man who believed time belonged to him. Then the woman beside him stepped forward. Celine Zhao, 5 months pregnant, the curve of her stomach visible under silk that clung like a declaration. Whispers snapped through the room like sparks. Evelyn did not move. She stood near her chair at the head table as if this were all expected. Damien smiled widely, basking in the shock. Apologies, he announced, voice carrying across the ballroom with polished ease. Traffic in Mayfair is as stubborn as my mother. A few nervous laughs. Margaret did not smile. Damien turned slightly, placing a possessive hand near Celine's back. This, Damien said, is Celine Zhao. Celine's chin lifted, her eyes scanning the room like she was already choosing who would bow. And, Damien continued, Celine is carrying my child. The ballroom froze. Even the servers stopped moving. Damien's gaze swept the room and landed on Evelyn. He waited. He wanted her reaction like dessert. Evelyn's hands rested lightly on the table. Her ring caught the chandelier light. She looked at Celine, then Damien, and she smiled. Not the tight smile of humiliation, not the trembling smile of denial. A gentle, composed smile. Congratulations, Evelyn said, her voice clear and calm. How wonderful! Damien blinked. That wasn't what he'd imagined. Celine's eyes flickered, confused by the lack of immediate conflict. Damien recovered quickly. He leaned forward like a man delivering a keynote speech. This child, he said, will be the next heir of Waverly Dominion. The next Waverly. He paused, dramatic, cruel. And it's time I stop pretending my marriage is functional. Evelyn and I will be divorcing. A collective inhale. Some board members shifted uncomfortably. A camera clicked somewhere. Twice. Damien watched Evelyn like a predator watching a trapped animal. Still, Evelyn remained calm. She reached for her glass. The rim touched her ring. Ting! The sound was small, but it landed with strange authority. Before we discuss private matters, Evelyn said, perhaps we should address something more urgent. Damien's smile faltered slightly. Urgent? Evelyn nodded gently as if guiding a child away from a street. Yes, she said. The fact that you have been transferring company assets to shell corporations in Singapore. The room snapped into a different kind of silence. Not gossip silence, danger silence. Damien laughed once, too loud. That's absurd! Evelyn's smile didn't change. She looked at Julian Crow, who stood behind the head table with a folder in his hands. Julian stepped forward, placing documents on the table. Margaret stood up. When Margaret Waverly stood, people listened. Even Damien. Damien, Margaret said, voice calm but lethal. Sit down. Damien's face tightened. Mother! Sit, Margaret repeated. Damien hesitated, then sat. Celine remained standing for a moment, unsure whether she was part of the family or merely an accessory. Evelyn gestured politely. Celine, please, sit. You must be tired. Celine's eyes narrowed, suspicious of kindness. But she sat. Evelyn looked around the ballroom. Her gaze was soft, almost apologetic. I didn't intend to make tonight unpleasant, Evelyn said. But when company funds are involved, I'm afraid unpleasantness is sometimes necessary. Damien's laugh came again, sharper. You're my wife. This is none of your business. Evelyn tilted her head. Isn't it? Julian cleared his throat. Evelyn spoke first, her voice steady. 15 years ago, Charles Waverly created the Charles Waverly Family Trust, she said. A legal structure designed to protect this company's voting control. Damien's eyes flickered. Just a moment of uncertainty. Evelyn continued. In that trust, Charles included a clause that most people never noticed. She nodded to Julian. Julian opened the folder and read, voice formal. Control of 60% of voting shares shall be held by the CEO's spouse, as an office attached to the position, and not by the CEO personally. The room reacted like a single organism. A murmur rose. Faces turned toward Evelyn. Damien stared as if someone had rewritten reality. That's, he began. Margaret spoke, calm as winter. It's true. Damien's face flushed. You knew? Margaret's eyes did not soften. Your father knew you. Damien's breath hitched. Evelyn looked at him almost gently. You announced divorce, she said. But you forgot something, Damien. You forgot that your power was never yours alone. Damien stood abruptly. This is manipulation. Evelyn! Evelyn raised a hand, not dramatic, just precise. Sit, she said softly. The word was not loud, but it carried. Damien hesitated again, then slowly sat as if the chair had turned into a verdict. Evelyn nodded to Graham Holt. Graham, pale, stood and placed another document on the table. Damien, Graham said, voice tight. These transfers, I verified them. They total $55 million over 8 months. I was instructed not to escalate. Damien's eyes flashed. Because it was strategic. Julian spoke, voice calm. Strategic doesn't require shell companies with personal signatories. Celine's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. She looked at Damien, her confidence shaking. Damien, what is he saying? Damien didn't look at her. Evelyn did. Celine, Evelyn said gently, I'm sorry you're learning this in public, but you deserve to know the truth. Celine's face tightened. Truth? Evelyn's eyes never left hers. The money wasn't being moved for the company, Evelyn said. It was being moved for him. Celine stared, blinking fast. Damien slammed his palm on the table. Enough! The sound echoed, but it didn't frighten the room. It only exposed him. Evelyn leaned slightly forward. Damien, she said, voice still calm, you've committed a breach of fiduciary duty. You attempted to divert corporate assets, and you did it immediately after learning Celine was pregnant. Damien's eyes widened, a flash of panic breaking through arrogance. Evelyn's smile softened like mercy. You were building a lifeboat, she said. You just didn't realize the ship wasn't yours. Margaret stepped forward, her voice formal now, boardroom voice. As chairwoman emerita and voting member, she said, I request an emergency session of the board effective immediately. Julian nodded. Under the Trusts Clause and the bylaws, the holder of the 60% voting shares, Mrs. Waverly, may call the board to vote on interim leadership. Damien's voice rose. This is a coup! Evelyn's gaze remained steady. No, she said. This is governance. Graham Holt's hands trembled slightly as he looked around the table. One by one, board members nodded. Some did it reluctantly. Some did it with relief. They had suspected for years Damien's ambition was sharper than his integrity. They simply hadn't had the proof. Now they did. Evelyn looked at Damien and offered him a final chance to save face. You can step down quietly, she said, or the board can remove you publicly. Damien's lips curled. You think they'll choose you? You're just... His eyes flicked down her dress, her pearls, her calm. The wife. Evelyn's ring tapped her glass again. Ting! I'm the one your father trusted, she replied softly. That's the only title that matters tonight. The emergency session happened in a smaller room off the ballroom, a room designed for quiet wars. The walls were soundproofed. The table was polished so perfectly it reflected faces like water. Evelyn sat at the head, not because she demanded it, but because the room simply arranged itself that way. Julian Crowe sat beside her. Margaret sat on her other side, hands folded, expression unreadable. Damien sat opposite, jaw clenched, trying to appear calm while his world cracked. Celine was not invited into the boardroom. She waited outside, surrounded by strangers, suddenly realizing she had entered a family's ritual without understanding the rules. Inside, Julian spoke with calm precision. Given the evidence of unauthorized transfers and potential criminal liability, he said, the board must vote on immediate suspension of Damien Waverly's CEO power. Damien leaned back. You're all making a mistake. Graham Holt spoke, voice strained. Damien, you moved $55 million. Damien's eyes flashed. I was protecting the company. Evelyn finally spoke. By hiding it? She asked quietly. Damien's gaze snapped to hers. By ensuring I wasn't trapped. There it was. Not even we. Not even the family. Me. Evelyn felt something inside her go still. Not sadness. Not anger. Acceptance. She had loved him once. But love, she realized, doesn't survive being used as decoration. Margaret's voice cut in, sharper than a paper edge. You were not trapped, she said. You were trusted. Damien's face tightened. You're taking her side? Margaret's eyes were cold. I'm taking your father's side, and the company's, and your children's. Damien laughed bitterly. My children? Evelyn's gaze hardened slightly. Amelia and Henry, yes. Damien's lips curled. They'll hate you when they learn what you did. Evelyn's voice didn't rise. They'll learn what you did, she said, and they'll be protected from it. Julian placed a document on the table. This is an injunction request, he said. Pending investigation, all assets connected to Waverly Dominion under Damien Waverly's control will be frozen. Damien's eyes widened. You can't. Julian's tone remained polite. We can, and we will, to protect shareholders. A board member, Helena Voss, head of legal compliance, spoke carefully. Damien, Helena said, this isn't personal. It's policy. Damien's laugh was sharp. Everything is personal. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "No, this is consequence." Julian initiated the vote. One by one, hands raised. Every hand. Unanimous. The room didn't celebrate. It didn't need to. Victory in rooms like this is never loud. Julian turned to Evelyn. As per the trust and bylaws, the board elects Evelyn Hart Waverly as interim CEO of Waverly Dominion Group, effective immediately. Evelyn exhaled slowly. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply nodded, like a person accepting a responsibility she had already been carrying invisibly for years. Damien stood abruptly, rage breaking through. This is insane. You'll regret it." Margaret pressed a button on the table. The door opened. 2 security guards appeared, not the dramatic kind, professional, neutral, as if escorting someone out of a museum. "Mr. Waverly," one guard said, "please come with us." Damien's face flushed. "You're removing me from my own building." Evelyn's voice was calm. "It was never your building alone." Damien looked at her, eyes wild. For a moment, the mask slipped completely. "I loved you," he hissed. Evelyn's gaze softened, but not with forgiveness. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "people love the comfort someone gives them, not the person." Damien's mouth opened again, but Margaret spoke first. "Damien," she said, voice low, "do not make this uglier than it already is." Damien's eyes flicked to his mother. For the first time, fear entered them. Because when a mother stops protecting you, the world becomes very large. The guard stepped forward. Damien adjusted his suit as if dignity could be buttoned. He walked out, and when he returned to the ballroom, the room was waiting. Celine stood near the head table, hands trembling. Her eyes searched Damien's face for reassurance. Damien didn't look at her. He looked at the cameras. He looked at the board. He looked at Evelyn. Then the guards guided him forward. Whispers erupted, no longer sparks, but flame. Someone gasped. Someone laughed nervously. Celine reached out instinctively. "Damien, what's happening?" Damien finally looked at her. His expression was tight. "It's fine," he said quickly. "It's temporary." Evelyn stepped forward. Celine's eyes snapped to her, anger rising like defensive heat. "You did this," Celine spat. Evelyn didn't flinch. "I stopped him," Evelyn replied softly. "There's a difference." Celine's hand tightened over her stomach. "You're enjoying this." Evelyn's gaze held hers. "No," she said. "I'm surviving it." Celine's eyes filled, confusion mixing with rage. "He said," Celine began, voice cracking. "He said you were cold. He said you didn't care." Evelyn's expression softened just slightly. "He says whatever makes him the hero," Evelyn replied. Damien's voice cut in sharply. "Don't listen to her." Celine looked between them, realizing too late that she had been handed a story, not a truth. The guards guided Damien toward the doors. His shoes clicked on marble like punctuation. Evelyn watched him go. The empire didn't tremble. The chandelier didn't flicker. Only the rain persisted, tapping the windows like a reminder. Power doesn't vanish. It transfers. In the days that followed, London fed on the story like it was dessert. Headlines didn't care about nuance. They cared about shock. CEO removed at founder's dinner. Pregnant mistress. Public divorce. Corporate coup. Waverly Empire turns on itself. Evelyn read none of it. Not because she was above it, because she had work to do. Interim CEO wasn't a title, it was a fire. The morning after the dinner, Evelyn arrived at Waverly Dominion's executive floor before sunrise. The hallways were quiet, the kind of quiet only powerful buildings have. The scent of polished wood, the hum of security systems, the faint echo of footsteps. Graham Holt met her outside the CEO office, looking as if he hadn't slept. "Evelyn," he said, voice low, "the banks are calling. Investors are anxious. The media is feral." Evelyn nodded. Schedule calls. Prioritize stability. Graham swallowed. And Damien, he's making threats. Of course he is, Evelyn replied gently. He's never learned a different language. Helena Voss approached with a stack of documents. We've filed the asset freeze, Helena said. We've initiated internal investigation. If the forensic team confirms criminal intent... Evelyn lifted a hand. We don't speculate. We verify. Helena nodded, impressed. Marg arrived moments later, her heels clicking with familiar authority. She looked at Evelyn in the corridor, her gaze sharp. Are you prepared for how lonely this will be? Margaret asked. Evelyn's mouth curved faintly. I've been lonely for years. Margaret studied her. Then something softened briefly in the older woman's eyes. Good, Margaret said. Lonely like the moment after a storm, when the world is wet but intact. A soft knock. Mara entered, hesitant. Mrs. Waverly, Mara said, eyes wide. There's a woman downstairs. She asked for you. Evelyn's breath slowed. Celine, she said. Mara nodded. Evelyn paused. She could refuse. She could send lawyers. She could let Celine drown in the mess she helped create. But Evelyn remembered something Charles had said long ago. Protection isn't romantic. It's responsibility. Bring her up, Evelyn said. Celine arrived 10 minutes later, eyes red, face drawn. Without Damien beside her, she looked younger, less like a threat, more like a person. She stood in the doorway as if expecting a trap. Evelyn gestured to a chair. Sit, Evelyn said. Celine didn't move. Why are you being polite? Celine demanded, voice trembling. I ruined your marriage. Evelyn studied her carefully. You didn't ruin my marriage, Evelyn said. Damien did. Celine's throat tightened. He said you didn't want children anymore. That you... Evelyn's gaze sharpened. Did he also say you were special? Celine flinched. Evelyn, I didn't know about the money. Evelyn watched her. There was fear in Celine's face. Fear, not of scandal, but of being abandoned. Of being left alone with a child and a story nobody would believe. Evelyn leaned forward slightly, softening her voice. Celine, she said, you are carrying a child who did nothing wrong. Celine blinked. You hate me. Evelyn's expression didn't change. I don't have time to hate you, she said, and hatred wouldn't protect anyone. Celine's shoulders sagged, tears slipping down. Evelyn handed her a tissue, simple, human. What are you offering? Celine asked, suspicious even in grief. Evelyn's voice was careful. I'm offering support, medical care, legal counsel, enough financial stability that you won't feel forced to crawl back to Damien. Celine's eyes widened. Why? Evelyn's gaze drifted briefly to the rain beyond the window. Because I know what it is to be told you're safe, she said softly, and then discover you were only convenient. Celine's breathing hitched. Evelyn continued. And because if I become the kind of woman who crushes a pregnant stranger for sport, then Damien wins anyway. He turns me into his story. Celine whispered, He said you'd destroy me. Evelyn looked at her steadily. I will not, she said, but I also won't pretend we're friends. This is mercy, not intimacy. Celine nodded, shaky. Will you? About what Damien promised you, what he told you, who introduced you, where he took you, what accounts he mentioned. Celine swallowed. You want me to testify? Evelyn nodded. Not against your child's father, against the man who manipulated you. Celine looked away, ashamed. Then, slowly, she nodded. I'll do it, Celine whispered. Evelyn exhaled. Outside, the rain continued. But inside, something shifted. Not forgiveness, not friendship. A line being drawn. A future being built differently. That evening, Evelyn went home early. Not because she was overwhelmed. Because Amelia had a piano lesson. Because Henry had a school project. Because being CEO didn't excuse being a mother. At home, Amelia looked up from the sofa. Mom, she said, voice small. Where's Dad? Evelyn sat beside her, smoothing her daughter's hair. Henry stood in the doorway, pretending not to listen. Evelyn chose her words carefully, the way you choose glassware, with awareness of what might shatter. "Dad made choices," Evelyn said softly, "and those choices have consequences." Amelia's eyes filled. "Is it because of that woman?" Evelyn's throat tightened. "It's because of Dad," Evelyn corrected gently. "Not her." Henry asked quietly, "Is he coming back?" Evelyn looked at her son. She saw Damien's jawline in him. She saw her own eyes. She felt the weight of stewardship again, this time not for an empire, but for two hearts. "I don't know," Evelyn admitted, "but what I do know is this. You are safe. You are loved. And no matter what happens, I will protect you." Henry's face twisted. "But he's our father." Evelyn nodded. "Yes." Henry's voice cracked. "So why does it feel like he chose someone else?" Evelyn's chest tightened. She didn't lie. "Sometimes adults make selfish choices," she said softly, "and it hurts everyone around them." "That's not your fault." Amelia leaned into Evelyn's side. For a long moment, the house was quiet except for the rain. Then Evelyn's ring tapped gently against the teacup she held. Ting! A small sound. A familiar sound. No longer a warning. A reminder. She had survived. Now she would lead. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn did what Damien never could. She stabilized. She held investor calls with honesty. She met department heads and listened. She cut waste without cruelty. She changed the culture quietly, like sunlight shifting in a room. Margaret watched her with the kind of expression mothers reserve for children who finally become adults. "You're not making the mistake I did," Margaret admitted one evening in the boardroom after most had left. Evelyn looked up. "What mistake?" Margaret's lips tightened. "Thinking softness is weakness. I spent years hardening myself to survive Charles's world, and then I raised Damien thinking hardness was inheritance." Evelyn's gaze lowered. Margaret continued, voice low. "But you are hard in the right places." Evelyn's breath was steady. "I'm hard where it protects, soft where it heals." Margaret nodded slowly. "Charles chose well," she said. Evelyn's eyes flicked to the founder's portrait across the room. For a moment she imagined Charles watching, not smiling, approving. Damien tried, of course. He didn't vanish into shame. Men like Damien don't accept endings. They rewrite them. He called journalists. He painted Evelyn as calculating. He implied Margaret had dementia. He suggested the board was manipulated. He threatened lawsuits. But each time he spoke, the facts followed him like shadow. The forensic accountants confirmed the transfers. The shell companies led to signatories connected to Damien's personal lawyer. Celine's statement documented his promises and timelines. And when the courts upheld the asset freeze, Damien's world narrowed fast. He tried to call Evelyn late one night. Unknown number. Evelyn let it ring twice before answering, not because she wanted to hear him, but because she wanted him to know she was not afraid. His voice came through, thick with forced calm. "You're enjoying this," Damien said. Evelyn leaned against the kitchen counter, watching rain slide down the window. "No," she replied. "I'm correcting it." Damien's breath hitched. "You think you're better than me?" Evelyn's voice remained soft. "I think I'm responsible in ways you never wanted to be." Damien's tone sharpened. "You're ruining my life." Evelyn paused. Then she said something that felt like closing a door. "No," she replied calmly. "You did that the moment you decided everyone else was disposable." Damien's silence was heavy. Then he tried the last weapon he had left. The children. "They'll come to me," Damien said quietly. "One day they'll see you for what you are." Evelyn's eyes closed briefly. When she spoke again, her voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "If you truly loved them," she said, "you'd stop using them as threats." Damien exhaled sharply. "You always thought you were righteous." Evelyn opened her eyes and looked at her ring. Ting! She tapped it once against the counter, a tiny sound that grounded her. This isn't righteousness, she said. It's boundaries. She ended the call, and for the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't expected. Not victory, freedom. On the day Evelyn was officially confirmed as permanent CEO, no longer interim, London's rain paused, as if even the weather wanted to watch. The board gathered. Investors tuned in. Cameras waited. Evelyn stood at the podium in a simple black suit. No pearls, no costume, just herself. She didn't mention Damien by name. She didn't need to. She spoke about stewardship, about transparency, about protecting legacy without worshiping it. When she finished, the applause was polite, controlled, business applause. But in the back, Margaret Waverley stood and clapped once, slow and deliberate. Then again, and again, until the room followed. Evelyn stepped down, her heart steady. Outside, she walked to the window overlooking Mayfair. Cars moved like silent pieces. People hurried beneath umbrellas, unaware of the quiet revolution that had happened above them. Julian Crowe approached, holding a folder. "Celine signed the agreement," he said, "and the medical fund is arranged. She'll be taken care of." Evelyn nodded. "Good." Julian hesitated. "Most people would have destroyed her." Evelyn's gaze stayed on the city. "Most people confuse punishment with justice," she replied. Julian's voice softened. "And Damien?" Evelyn's answer was quiet. "Damien will face what he built," she said. "A life where nobody trusts him." Julian nodded. Evelyn touched her ring, not as a symbol of marriage now, but as a symbol of survival. Outside, the rain began again, gentle this time, not a storm, a cleansing. In the reflection of the window, Evelyn saw herself, not as Mrs. Waverley, not as the quiet wife, as Evelyn Hart Waverley, CEO, mother, steward of an empire she had protected long before anyone noticed. And somewhere deep in the building, far below the ballroom where Damien once believed he could humiliate her, the elevators hummed, moving people up and down. Power always moving, always transferring, always finding the person who knows how to hold it. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, treated like you were just something, leave a comment with the word steady. Because sometimes revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it doesn't look like fire. Sometimes it looks like a woman who stays calm and finally chooses herself.